Hey everyone, well, welcome back to my shop. It's been a little while since I've done a video and now I'm back at it. And this next project is an inspiration from a couple of videos that I've watched. One of them is from a guy by the name of Ben's Works. He did a live edge tabletop where he routed out in the center and recessed in some hand tools, some old antique hand tools like pliers and wire cutters and stuff like that. And then he filled it in with the bar top resin, the epoxy. He used over a gallon of it and filled it all in, and man did that thing ever turn out nice. And then the second video was can't remember the name, but MT Gear Man Stuff. I will put the links down below for the two videos. He did a little ice cube tray, silicone ice cube tray, where he took live 22 ammunition, put it in the tray, and then filled it with the resin and made a little paperweight. And I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. There's another project that I can do, or a variation of, and here's my variation of that project. So this is my project. I'm going to be making some live edge coasters, so you can set your beer or your coffee cup on it or whatever. I'm making it out of some apple wood. I'm going to recess out the middle and fill it with some spent 22 caliber casings and a few other odd calibers, and even throw in some live ammunition into there too. Then I'm going to fill it with the bar top resin, but first I want to preserve the bark on here, so I'm going to get started on that. To try and preserve the bark, I'm just going to pour some CA glue on it. This is thin CA glue. I'm just going to pour it on and let it set and hope for the best that I can preserve it. Okay, so I put 3 coats of CA glue on the bark. Hopefully that's going to stabilize the bark and not come off. Now I'm going to flatten the bottoms before I run them through the thickness planer to reduce them down to the thickness that I want. Okay, I've run these through the jointer and flattened the bottoms out. I did have a little bit of tear out of the bark on one of these. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to glue this to this bed with some hot glue. My intention was to use this as a router plane. Basically, piece of plywood, couple of rails, flat. Made the sled with stops. And when you put your router in like this, it'll stop so it won't hit, the bit will not hit this part of the rail, but you can move it back and forth and then drop your bit down and keep on planing. But what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to run this through my thickness planer. I also wanted to point out that when I run this through the thickness planer, the side rails are going to guide it through the thickness planer and help it roll. And then the block on the back is to prevent anything from shooting out on the back. Well, running it through the thickness planer actually did a pretty good job, I think. They're all the same thickness. I did get some tear out on the bark, but I guess that's expected. It actually looks not too bad. You know, it's actually quite minimal. It's just over here and a little bit in here on the sides, but where it tore out right here, I should be able to fix it and just clean it up when I take it off. So my next step is I'm going to take it off, clean off the hot glue off the bottom, and then I'm going to route out the centers of these. Okay, so I've taken the chunks of wood off the board, and before I clean this up, I'm going to trace out the outline of this on a scrap piece of plywood and then cut it out on the bandsaw and make a template so that I can run my router with a flush trim bit and route out the center of these. And the reason why I'm not cleaning this off is why clean it twice when I'm going to use a bit more hot glue and stick it down to the surface so that it won't move when I use the router. So I'm going to start sanding these, and I'm going to use some 80 grit with the orbital sander. And I noticed that the bark is coming off, and I'm going to take the rough sandpaper and run it along the edge and kind of clean up all the rough stuff and see what happens and go from there. So these are all sanded up and cleaned up all the rough edges, and I'm happy the way that turned out. This one here has a knot hole, so that's why it's covered with some foil tape to fill in the hole. Once the hole's filled, I will take the tape off and do the final coat on this one where it'll run over the edge. So now I'm going to mix up some resin, and I'm going to pour a little bit on the bottom as a primer coat, and then I'm going to start putting in the 22 ammo. So I'm going to be using System 3 Mirror Coat. Really simple to use, just follow the instructions on it and make sure you mix it very well according to the instructions, otherwise you'll have a bad pour. It won't turn out properly. As long as you follow the instructions, it'll work great. This is a 2-to-1 system, so 2 parts of part A and 1 part of part B, or you can mix it by, that's by volume, or you can mix it by weight of 100 grams of part A and 44 grams of part B. So I'm just going to mix up a small amount on the scale. It'll be a lot easier, and I'm going to pour it in, use a torch to get rid of the bubbles. Now I had a problem with the resin part A. It had become very thick. I even warmed it up as per the recommendations, but it was still very thick. When I mixed it, it actually turned milky white as opposed to being kind of cloudy. And you'll notice this later on when I mix it and I pour it. I could have used the brush at this point and brushed it on. It would have reduced the air bubbles quite a bit, and it would have also reduced the need to use the torch as much. I noticed that the resin was thick and it wasn't flowing as much, and the more you use the torch, the warmer it gets and the faster it sets up. Using a heat gun or a blowtorch will help pop the bubbles and can help the resin flow, but it can also cause the resin not to flow from it getting too warm. I wanted to set the ammo in the resin while it was still liquid, so I can move the ammo if I needed. But the resin was setting too fast, and I barely had enough time. At this point I decided to get some new resin, and I went with this Epoxy. You can notice the difference in the resin in the first pour. It's slightly cloudy and not white. I'm just pouring small amounts. I used a hairdryer to level the resin and pop the bubbles, and then I let the resin level out and set overnight. On the second pour I'm adding small amounts. You don't want to pour more than 1/8 of an inch of resin at a time. On this pour, I poured enough resin to be almost level with the rim, but not going over the rim. I then torched it and let it level out and set again. You can see the pieces of paper I used to level out the coasters. I set the coasters up on blocks so that they were off the plywood surface and made sure they were absolutely level. And on this pour, I poured just enough resin to not run over the edge. I then used a brush to paint the resin on the rim and the sides and the bark. You can use a foam brush too. I then torched out any bubbles and let it set overnight. This part is self-explanatory. I just sanded off the drips and cleaned the bottoms. Then I added felt pads on the bottom so it'll sit level and not scratch up any table surface. So these are the finished coasters. There's one thing that I noticed that did go wrong. There were air bubbles that came out of some of the cartridges and got trapped in the resin. If I was to do this again, I might dip the cartridges in CA glue to seal the cartridges. Other than that, I'm quite happy the way the coasters turned out. They look really cool with the live ammo embedded in the resin. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and it inspired you to make something. Hit the thumbs up or down button and please leave a comment or suggestion and tell me what you think. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe. I will have lots more videos coming soon. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram to see more upcoming projects. Thanks again for watching and please be safe and take care.